Good afternoon and welcome to the Warrior Symposium for SOS Class 17 Bravo. I am Major Barber, and before I introduce our guest speakers, I would like to set the stage for our theme, Confronting the ISIS Assault. Air power is the family business. It is our job, and it succeeds or fails because of us. Air power is dynamic, has a global reach unlike anything in the history of warfare, and provides options to our leaders unseen in any other time in history. We live in a rapidly changing world of glowing turmoil. Conflicts ignite unsuspectedly, and our enemies are growing in number. Several leaders of our armed forces and some of the most respected geopolitical analysts in this country predict a high probability of large-scale conflict sometime during your careers. In this world stage, air power is getting harder, not easier. Risk, competitors' capabilities, and political constraints are increasing. The three individuals speaking to you today were instrumental in the large-scale application of air power to stop and ultimately reverse a regime that swept across 35,000 square miles of the Middle East to establish the first caliphate the world has seen in over 100 years. This caliphate based itself on a form of evil unseen since the days of Hitler's Third Reich that glorifies brutality and the destruction of any form of human freedom or dignity. Without a coalition of nations bringing air power to bear on this threat, the ends would be far different than what they are today. The location, duration, and intensity of the next conflict is unknown. Many in this room will face their own moment against a determined enemy. I hope these experiences you are about to hear will aid in preparing you for that moment. You wear the uniform of the world's greatest country. You are beholden to the profession of arms. You have been entrusted by our people to stop evil far from our shores. Today, we are honored to welcome three combat-proven warriors who have done just that. Before we begin, be advised of the ROEs for this event. Please hold all your questions until our presenters have finished. We will then bring them out and let you ask questions of the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, our first speaker, Major Michael Benitez, United States Air Force. Major Michael W. Paco Benitez is currently assigned as the Air Force Legislative Fellow serving in the Chairman Joint Chiefs of Legislative Affairs Office. He is part of a small team reportable to the Chairman that facilitates congressional relations on his behalf, while representing his joint staff and operational equities within the Department of Defense. Major Benitez entered military service at Marine Corps Recruit Training Depot, Parris Island, South Carolina in 1997. During 8 years of service and combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, he completed a degree from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and accepted transfer to Officer Training School in 2005, where he was commissioned. Following F-15E formal training unit completion at the 333rd Fighter Squadron at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, he remained on station for assignment to the 336th Fighter Squadron. After completing 2 more combat deployments, he was assigned to instruct at the 334th Fighter Squadron formal training unit. Prior to his current assignment, Major Benitez was assigned to the 492nd Fighter Squadron, Royal Air Force Lakenheath, United Kingdom, where he served as a flight commander and the lead instructor tactician of a 75-member, 24-aircraft F-15E Strike Eagle Squadron that supported both conventional and nuclear missions in support of United States, European Command, Africa Command, Central Command, and NATO. Major Benitez is a senior navigator with more than 2,000 hours in the CH-46, CH-53, F-18F, and F-15E. His operational experiences include more than 11 months of sea time among 2 amphibious ready groups and a carrier strike group, as well as 250-plus combat sorties during operations Swift Freedom, Enduring Freedom, Al Jafar, Phantom Fury, Iraqi Freedom, Graphite Arrow, and Inherent Resolve. He has also flown Noble Eagle Homeland Defense. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Major Benitez.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here today. So there's really, we have a lot of stuff I want to get to, not a whole lot of time, and so I just want to jump right into it. So 2 things I want to talk about today, leadership and air power. And if you guys heard a little bit in the intro, it's getting a little bit harder and harder to make air power happen, and it's going to take better and better leadership. And so the whole point of it is we need to bring air power and leadership together because we're in a point of transition right now. If you haven't noticed, the world is rapidly changing, and so we have to change in how we deal with that. So I think it's pretty, it's interesting. I was thinking about, I'm 12 Bravo SOS 4.5 years ago. I was about sitting right there in the middle. maybe about 5 or 6 rows back. And so when I got the call, say, hey, you want to come and talk to these guys? Like, absolutely. So I was thinking about, what am I going to say to you guys that you probably hadn't already looked up online about what's going on? And I thought about it. I was like, what would some other people do? So I did a little research, and I kind of drawed on just down the road. So building 900, it's about 2 blocks from here. There's a course about 25 years before the Air Force became an independent service. And this course was about 6 weeks long. And it had captains and lieutenants. And they went through this course. They learned about leadership and learned about air power. And their instructors were senior captains and junior majors. Does that sound familiar? So this place was called the Air Corps Tactical School. And these people that went through this course, pretty interesting group of people. About half of the Air Force bases we have today are named after them. And then you have other people like Doolittle, LeMay, Chenault, Kenny, Spots. And the interesting thing about it isn't that right now we think of them as giants, right? They underpin the service that we have today. But the reality is they're all captains. They're all captains in the leading edge of the bomber mafia and developing pursuit tactics and all the things that grew our Air Force 20 to 30 years later. So I kind of draw on that as emergent leaders as captains. And in my experience, you heard the bio, the captains are what makes air power happen. Bar none. That's the whole theme. So I have this slide up here for 2 reasons. Number one, most people would probably be a little bit confused of what is a weapons systems officer. So that's me in the back seat, not the front seat. So I actually do fly, so I wear a flight suit. And then my name is up there because I am really horrible with names, and I'm guessing that probably one of you in this crowd is probably the same. And so there's my name for questions later if you want to get a hold of me. Okay, so that Air Corps Tactical School, there's something really interesting about that. So this is from Building 900 from back in the 30s. So their motto translates to, "We make progress unhindered by custom." Can you imagine if we had an organization today with that kind of motto and mission statement, that license to learn and innovate? Well, guess what? We are in the beginning of having to get to that transformation point. So we're at that critical juncture. Okay, so what I want to talk about is my deployment. I deployed from March until October of 2014 from Lakenheath. We were assigned to the UAE, the 380th Wing. And just to paint a picture of my squadron, we did a 12-jet deployment, which is a little bit smaller than what we normally do. And that was because we were in a drawdown from operations in Afghanistan. We were doing home station training at our deployed location, and we were doing flying into Afghanistan every day. So very, very long sorties, fly a couple a week. But most of it was about training and readiness. We were the first grounded squadron from sequestration to deploy. And so we deployed, and we honestly really weren't ready. And so we prioritized our time on deployment to rebuild our cadre and experience. Qualifications, upgrades, all of that. And guess what? I'm glad we had that opportunity. This was 3 months before operations kicked off. So it was May, I remember the day, it was May 30th, 2014. It was a Sunday, which is my day off on deployment. And I get a call in my room that says, hey, pack your bags in an hour, you're going to the KAOC. So over in IUD. So I pack my bags, and I meet with a good friend of mine who is he's an F-22 weapons officer, so exact same thing I do, F-22 guy. So we'd shared a building, a flight line, a ramp, because we were deployed together. So there's F-22s with us. There'll be a little bit more about that later. So we go to the KAOC, like, hey, what's going on? Or all this, fervor is going on, there's ISIS, and things are bad. So we show up, catch a C-130, we show up, and we if you've ever seen crisis action planning, it is a whole lot of crisis, not so much action, and almost no planning. So that's kind of the big secret about where it really is a crisis. So we got involved in the very beginning of setting a little bit of the administration portion of setting the conditions to start operations in Iraq. The carrier, the George H.W. Bush, moved from the Gulf of Oman, which is on the east of the Straits of Hormuz. It moved through the Straits and up off the coast of Kuwait. and we were posturing wide-body ISR and tankers and getting approvals from host nations to then shift operations. And you can imagine that's actually a pretty big deal. So I spent about 2 weeks at the KAOC doing multiple things, and I would return about a day or two after we started flying the Navy into theater. At this point, Air Force aircraft fighters do not have approval to fly into Iraq because of some host nation sensitivities at the time. So it was just the Navy that started it with, again, our Air Force support to them. But about 5 weeks after that, we had some approvals with some random restrictions about what we could start doing, and now we started flying into Iraq from our base. And what's interesting now is we're still doing local training too, by the way, with our host nation. We're doing multilateral exercises, and then when we're not doing that, we'd take off and we'd fly 900 miles east with a completely different set of ROE spins and a problem, and then the next day we'd take off and fly 900 miles west, and we have a completely different problem. So it's a really, really dynamic environment, and it was really, really tough in the beginning to keep all of the pieces from falling apart. So we flew up there, and for probably about 5 weeks, there was no kinetics. And it was, looking back, I thought it was a mistake. Honestly, we see what's going on the ground and what ISIS is doing. We see it. I can see these people getting slaughtered, and you can see the push as they move into Iraq from Syria in the north. And it was really just devastating to see, like, we have everything to do to help you, but our hands are tied. Now, looking back, I think that was the right choice if we could have seized the initiative when we started actual kinetic operations. And the spoiler alert is we did not. So ISIS evolved faster than we could evolve, and I'll show you some stories of how that all unfolded. So that kind of set the conditions. A couple of good stories and maybe some not so good stories from this awkward time where we didn't have kinetic approval. So a good story. First time, and I've been around a little bit, first time I'd ever seen space integrated in near real time to a tasking that I was involved in. And so the example I give is I remember being north of Baghdad, middle of the day, and we get a call on the radio that says, hey, go to this grid, there is a tank battle. Like, clearly this is not right, and we had been sent on some wild goose chases before the previous few days, like there's no way this is right. And sure enough, we show up, put the grid in, look, and look, there is a tank battle. Like a T-55 tank battle. 4 Iraqi tanks from the south versus 2 ISIS tanks in the north, and they're using buildings and shoot and scoot tactics, and for 2 hours we watched this tank battle. Amazing. Now, we couldn't do anything about it, that's the bad part, but integrating our space assets, so we got back, and like, how did we get that intel? Like, oh, it was a satellite, picked up the muzzle flash of a tank, and they saw how often it was happening and how many there were, and they started building a picture, and they go, hey, investigate. So that's pretty amazing. There's some other not so good stuff, but really it's just some funny stuff. So we had, I remember flying west of Baghdad at night, and our wingman calls out AAA right 5 o'clock, which we're getting shot at from anti-aircraft artillery. And we've been looking outside, and so we don't maneuver, and our wingman's like, calls it out again. Like, hey, can you describe what you're seeing? He's like, oh, sure can. It's got this large muzzle flash. You see it on night vision goggles pretty clear. It's got this really high upward trajectory, and it kind of just teeters out and just falls back down. And like, yep, that's right. Like, that's artillery. And he had never seen artillery before. So things like that, like we're thinking about combined arms and what's actually going on. That was a Baghdad artillery brigade shooting ISIS to the west in like the Sunni triangle area. So let's fast forward a little bit, and now we have some connects we want to talk about. And each one of these is a couple separate stories. The theme, as I go through how this all unfolded, is interesting because they all had different authorities, and the tenure of that engagement authority and that window was changing every day. So we probably went through dozens of ROE and spins changes a day. So we'd take off with one set of authorities, check in with a different set, and then by the time we were on our way home, it had changed 3 or 4 times. And that is a direct result of the policies from really the Pentagon and DoD that were real-time evolving. So this was not, we talk about phase-based operations if you learn about like how that is, so phase 0, phase 1, phase 2. Don't think of this in the context of phases. Instead, think of it as first aid. So this is the first aid campaign. So there's the 4 stages of first aid, right? So I want to stop the bleeding, start the breathing, protect the wound, treat for shock. So if you put that kind of lens on how this all unfolded as first aid, not strategy, not a campaign, it kind of puts the right lens on it. Okay, so the first kinetics that happened were in Erbil, August 8th, and what had happened was we'd seen ISIS invade pretty much Iraq, and they were slaughtering people. You guys probably saw it all in the news. And so what the planners did is they regrouped. They go, where's our red line? And they literally drew a red line. They identified our national interests in the airfield and their surrounding American consulate in that area. And they went back and they said, well, where are the funneling features that go into this town? And there's 3 bridges about 10 miles west of the city. And I said, well, if everyone has to go through these 3 bridges to get to the city, why don't we just connect them and make that our red line? And that's where kinetics happened. When ISIS crossed that red line is when we had engagement authority, and that's where the whole thing kicked off from OIR. So realize to get to that point, they had gained a massive amount of territory, and this kind of put us on the defense. So this is, again, first aid. So I want to show you this video. These are all open source videos, but I can give you some context for them. So this video is a ISIS APC that had just crossed the red line. This is, I think this is one of the first kinetics, if not the first, from the whole campaign. And spoiler alert, it was not the Navy. So for about 6 weeks, because of host nation sensitivities, we attributed everything that happened in that country to the Navy. So the Navy flying off carriers are doing all this good work, and they were doing great work. Don't get me wrong. But the Air Force was there too. And so what's interesting about this story, if you're an operator, you go, well, that's kind of neat. It's not really a big explosion, and it's not. So that's a Hellfire missile. So then you're probably asking, well, why does a Strike Eagle have a pod video of a Hellfire missile? Well, it's because that MQ-1 being flown that day had a laser failure, and they said, hey, we need someone to laser in this Hellfire. And the Strike Eagle, they're like, well, we have these bombs we could drop we have small bombs, but they're not that small. And they said, nope, it's got to be a Hellfire because of collateral damage. You can see the wall, the building on the bottom of the right of the screen. And so this guy, lieutenant, on his first combat sortie, is like, hey, you need to laser in this Hellfire. He's like, great, never heard of it. No idea. And he's flying with a good friend of mine who's a major. And so they talk about it. He's like, have you ever done this? He's like, nope, never. He's like, okay. And so they get out there and they draw some things up real quick. And it sounds easy, like, oh, I'm just going to put the laser on, turn it on, and it blows up when the weapon gets there, right? Not so much, because it has a seeker field of view, and it's got to be on a certain angle. And oh, by the way, if you know anything about an MQ-1, it flies really, really slow, and fighters don't fly really, really slow. So there's about a 200-knot airspeed difference that you have to account for in the turn radius. So he's flying, figures out this game plan. They dry run it twice to make sure they could do it and it'll work out, because these are expensive weapons, and they only have, I think at the time, 1 Hellfire per MQ-1. So this is a one-shot, one deal. And obviously it worked out. But this shows you just how hard air power is. Air power is hard. We're in the business of hard, and our job is to use the tools that we have to make it look easy. So at the time that was going on, about August 3rd or so, the next significant event you probably saw in the news started to unfold. So as ISIS was marching through the border on the way to Erbil, there was a town called Sinjar. And they had just instantly slaughtered in one day, 5,000 of the Yazidis. And that created a huge crisis because everyone else fled. And there's a small mountain, it's really a hill, but it's a small mountain, Sinjar Mountain, that all of these people fled up to get away. And we started using airstrikes to contain ISIS so they wouldn't go up the mountain, but now the problem is they can't get off the mountain. So if you imagine like your favorite sports team, you're at an NFL stadium and it's a sold-out crowd, that's what we're talking about. 50,000 people are sitting on this mountain that are stuck. And at this point, it's been about 10 days, and they're starving to death. They have no food, no water. And so, again, we're still in that first aid phase, so we got to help them. So the KAOC puts together an airdrop, which is awesome. And it was a 16 aircraft airdrop, C-17s and C-130s from the US. We had the British and the Aussies, C-130s. And it was a 16 aircraft package. We briefed it all up. We had all these timing checkpoints and dozens of code words, and just like you would textbook training, right? Textbook training. Except we didn't really use the reasonable man concept. And so think about this. If you were one of the 50,000 people on the mountain and you see this pallet fall from the sky, what are you going to do? You're going to go get food so you don't die, right? So we had set up this 16 aircraft package, ducks in a row, one after another, to drop pallets on the same point. And so after the second aircraft's pallets hit, I remember being airborne watching this. It was like fire ants on sugar cubes. The sugar cube would hit, and you just see troves of people just coming out of everywhere, just ripping the pallets apart to get food. And so the fighters and the MQ-1s that are on station are telling the package, like, abort, abort, like, don't drop any more pallets. And so we reset, we adapt and overcome. But you'd think it'd be real easy. We're just going to drive there, and no one had thought about what is going to happen after those pallets leave the aircraft. We really hadn't had to think about that in a while. This is not training. This is reality. The third thing that happened, you see the sequence of events of how we're in trauma mode still. The Mosul Dam, so Operation Hydro Restore was what it was called. ISIS had taken over the dam. It's a significant landmark. So it controls electricity for the north, the water supply for the north, and there was a fear if they blew the dam that it could flood hundreds of cities and all the crops in northern Iraq as it went down the Tigris. So it was okay, we have to retake the Mosul Dam. Like, great, we don't have any people. Like, that's not really what we do. So this was the first partnered operation with people on the ground. So we worked with the Peshmerga, and the integration was, again, it was more adapt and overcome. So you'd think it'd be easy. Hey, we've been doing close air support for 15 years. Like, clearly, there's a guy on the ground, I can support him, right? It's not that hard. It's really hard. It's just not easy. So what we had ended up working out was because we didn't actually have people embedded with them, and they couldn't communicate with us because they don't speak English. We had an operator and one of their TOCs, one of their operating cells. And what they would do is they would use phones and just like, tell me where you're at. And they would translate it through interpreter, and then that guy would pick up another phone and call another operator, a US guy that's sitting on the ground, and then he would communicate with us. Hey, look here. This information's like 10 minutes old, and it's probably wrong, but look. And so what we ended up doing is our goal was to always find where the Peshmerga are, and if we put our sensors in a certain mode, if they're shooting, you can see the tracer fire, and all you had to do is use our sensors. We just draw a line and see what they're shooting at. And if we know where the good guys are at, and we know what they're shooting at, then common sense would say those are the bad guys. And so those are the types of workarounds that we were having to develop. And what we were doing is we were calling out. We turned into almost Peshmerga artillery spotters. So we would call out where their fire was going, telling them to adjust fires, and then we were also doing some kinetics to enable them as well. So air power is not easy. There's a couple other random things that happened. So the operators that we're talking with are on satellite radio, right? So all US aircraft have SATCOM. Not really. So the only ones that don't have SATCOM are the Navy. They never invested in it. They use a different kind of voice. And so the Navy couldn't just go up there and operate, so now we had to use another Air Force asset. And so this is where it starts. Air power gets harder and harder very, very quickly. So to get this Navy F-18 on station to talk with the guy on the ground who's now translating this information, we have to bring in an RQ-4 with a special comm package. And what he's going to do is be on another frequency, and the F-18 is going to communicate with the RQ-4. It's going to translate that, bounce it off a satellite, and then that's going to be the relay. This happened for about, it's probably still happening today, but definitely the first few months it was very, very painful. This video is, if you notice, you look real close, you've probably seen it a few times. There's actually 2 explosions. And here's the story behind it. So the Peshmerga had determined that because we were pushing back ISIS, they were getting desperate, and they were pretty fanatical anyways. And they had taken dump trucks and other construction equipment, and they were welding steel plates on them to turning them these up-armored vehicles like Mad Max. And they were piling them full of explosives, and they were just using them as just ramming checkpoints and blowing up. And that's what this is. And so we struck this with a bomb, and the first explosion is the bomb hitting, and the second explosion is the explosive material actually detonating. So now we shift down to Amarillo. It's a rinse and repeat a little bit of what went on up in Sinjar. So we had about 20,000 people in this town, same exact problem. They were surrounded, they're starving to death. We need to set up an airdrop. So the humanitarian aid came in. This is the first mission the French were involved in. And this is where we started getting traction and incorporating our lessons learned. So this one was different than the last one. We said, hey, we can't do that again. That's obviously not going to work. And so what we did on this is we used multiple different axes of attack and synchronized all of the airdrops so they would all release at the same time from all different points. And then just to make it even better, to ensure that we weren't going to hurt anyone, is we actually targeted airstrikes. Some were defensive airstrikes, some were just for effects. So if we have an airstrike, people are going to stop moving generally. So we would drop some, we coordinated to drop some weapons. They would explode at the same time the pallets are coming down so people would not run to them. So we started finding creative solutions to these problems that none of us had ever seen before. This is also the first operation that we now have a different chain of command. So up to this point, all the operations up in the north are by a different chain of command. Every bomb that comes off a jet has to be approved by a general, and he has to physically see a video. Physically see it. Like, I want to see full motion video. Well, the problem is that full motion video only really exists on our RPA fleet because it bounces off a satellite. All of our fighter platforms and bombers, we have a form of a data link for video, but it's not the same, and they don't talk, of course. Air power is hard. So we started developing these hunter-killer teams where if the MQ-1 had the video feed that the general wanted, but I had the weapons, why don't we just work together? And so what we'd do is we'd go to a working area, and we'd send the MQ-1 over there. We'd split up our formations of fighters here and here, and we'd all be looking for stuff. And if we found something, we would pull the MQ-1 over to look at it so our approval authorities could see it. And if they found something, they would call us over so we could strike it, because they only carried 1 or 2 weapons. Again, these are things that we hadn't really had to even think about doing before. But Amarillo was interesting because it had a different set of approvals, but the same bureaucratic processes. Right? So we probably, I didn't tell you this point, there's only about 4 MQ-1s in theater, which means, and there's only 2 generals with strike approval authority, so if the general's asleep or the MQ-1 is not available or around, then you're just not going to go kinetic. And so ISIS was able to adapt. Their OODA loop was so much faster than ours, the first 6 weeks of operations in Inherent Resolve, so much faster. Because of this, we assimilated risk with control, honestly. So I don't want to take any risk, and so therefore I'm not going to delegate any kind of control. And some of that was dictated by policy, so not the fault of the KAOC, even though they're generally the bad guy. It's mostly policy-driven. Haditha Dam, it sounds a lot like the Mosul Dam because it was. The interesting thing about this operation was that this was the first time we really used a Iraqi military-led operation with US air power. And we didn't have guys directly embedded on the ground, so the JTACs now they don't have SATCOM radios, they have line of sight radios, and they're sitting in Baghdad International Airport. Well, if you look at the map, that's a considerable distance away, it's about 130 miles. We'd seen some of the issues up in Amarillo before, which is about the same distance, but this one was definitely unique. Finding creative solutions, right? That's what air power is all about. So in this example, to find where that front line trace, where the people on the ground were, and go, well, we really don't have a way to communicate with them. It's too far apart. And so they had issued some Blue Force trackers to the Iraqis. Go, here, just turn these things on. If you know anything about how Blue Force tracking works, it doesn't work with any Air Force equipment, right? Why would it? So we had put a rivet joint up there, and the rivet joint collected the signal. It wasn't the actual data link, but it was a signal, because that's what it does. And it would take its signal that it would collect, it would geolocate roughly where they were, and they would push them out over the Air Force data link. And so now we were getting kind of a pretty crude way of making it happen. But again, then we started adapting the same procedures of if I know where they're at, I know where they're shooting, I could probably find the bad guys. The other interesting thing that happened is in this operation, you can't make this stuff up, is because we didn't have satellite radio and our line of sight radio, ours in aircraft are pretty good because we operate over some pretty big ranges, but the JTAC sitting in Baghdad doesn't have a very big radio. And the problem is that he could transmit and we couldn't hear him. But if we transmitted, he could hear us just fine. So it's kind of hard to coordinate an attack when they can't really hear each other, right? Good two-way comm. So they figured out and said, hey, do you have a data link terminal? Like, we know you're up on the link 16, our data link. He's like, yeah, like, hey, why don't you just send us a text message? Like, send us a text message, and then we'll just reply to you back on the radio. And our jet has a text message capability. We can receive, but we can't transmit. Go figure. So this is what, over the course of about an hour and a half, they figured out that if we transmit these text messages, you can just tell me what you're doing, and I'll just adjust the message and just keep this running dialogue. So over about an hour and a half, hundreds of text messages just bombarding these airplanes. And they're everything from like, go investigate this, here's your 9 line, the general says reattack, good job guys. It's just a running dialogue. It's amazing to see. When we designed that system, do you think we ever had that in mind? No. It's all about adapting and overcoming. So at this point, 15 September, so to paint a picture for you, this was the last operation before we kind of got our feet out from back under us. So we're still 30 days away from even calling this thing an operation, just to put a lens on it, right? October 15th is when they said, okay, this is now Operation Inherent Resolve. And oh, by the way, since we're in operation, here's your mission. We didn't even have a mission statement. We had no idea what we're doing because we're still in that first aid phase, right? The task force to lead OIR wouldn't even be stood up until December. Keep that in mind. So Baghdad was interesting for a few things, but my big takeaway is that because ISIS had learned how to adapt, and the video just stopped, didn't it? Oh, there it is. They had learned how to adapt, and they knew what our weaknesses were with our concerns with collateral damage, so they started hiding vehicles, and they were posturing them. So this airstrike is interesting for a few reasons. It's a 250-pound weapon that's hitting a truck hiding under a tree. And there's a little picture to the right. You can kind of see what the truck looks like, and you can see in the, as it loops around, the outline under the tree of where the truck is. And notice the building, nothing happens to the building, even the pole, or even the tree. The tree isn't even hurt, right? We'll be taking out the vehicles. And so when I think about things like that, as an operator, I initially look at, oh, that's really cool. But then the other side of me, the airman, I look at that completely different. That's hard. That's really, really hard. That is really the symbol of putting everything that we have together. So you think about that weapon. So like that weapon to get there, well, someone had to put it on the jet. And it's a team of 3 loaders that with certain qualifications, they load that weapon on that jet. Well, that weapon has to get to the jet. There's another team of people who drive and transport those munitions from the munition storage area to the flight line so they can be installed. But at the bomb dump, those weapons aren't just, you don't just crack open the case and throw it on the trailer. You have to build it. So there's people in the bomb dump that make the weapons. And that's a really unforgiving job. And then, well, those pieces have to get there. Like, well, who's responsible for that? And so you get into logistics and moving these things around and seeing the processes that are in place to ensure that we can get that weapon on target. But now that weapon's on the jet, great. So then now the jet needs fuel. And so you go on and so forth. To get that jet in the air, he needs a tanker. And to get that bomb to where it needs to go, it needs intel. Well, there's an MQ-1. Well, an MQ-1 takes 13 airmen to operate. And that signal, that collection from that MQ-1 is going to a distributed ground station somewhere else around the world. There's a team of people that are collecting the intel, vetting it, validating it, and then pushing it out to something that's actionable. So by the time that I get the information of, like, hey, there's a bad guy, investigate, tell me what you see as a final sanity check, yes, you can take him out. There's hundreds of people that have touched that process, hundreds, every single one of those weapons. So every time I see a video, I always think about the hundreds of people who had the part in making that one thing happen, that 10-second video clip that everyone loves to look at. Hundreds of people had their hands in that. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears into when we started kinetics into Syria. So you'd think up to this point, the Army was in charge. Everything in Iraq was in the Army. I just told you about our engagement authorities, how they were pretty restrictive. So the Air Force, time to shine, right? We fell into the same problem set. So we were extremely limited on how we delegated control. So decentralized execution, that sound familiar? So I'll tell you a little bit about the first few weeks, and then I really want to sum it up of what happened that day, because it's a really, really interesting story. So about first 2 weeks or so of airstrikes, it was the tail end of our deployment. So our new squadron was showing up, and we're doing the turnover. For those first 2 weeks, we had things that you would think would just be trivial. So I'm a mission commander. I'm in charge of all these aircraft. I make all the decisions. I've got commander's intent. I must go out and execute. I have a plan. It's solid. It's vetted. It's approved. Not so much. So as a mission commander in the beginning, I didn't even have push authority. I can't even tell my package to go. Even though I have a min package that's met, I briefed the min package, there's too much risk. I can't make that decision. Like, oh, that's interesting. Or, hey, we're going to go do strike coordination and reconnaissance, SCAR, which is you find something that's kill box ops. You guys probably may have heard the term before. But you don't actually have strike approval. So I'm not doing SCAR, I'm doing CAR. That's not a thing, is it? Which is really just ISR. It's not SCAR. Or, hey, we have fallout, and this target can't be hit because the guy that was going to hit the target, he had a maintenance problem. Something happened. Well, that target's more important than this target. Like, I should be able to go hit that target. These are things and considerations that we brief every day to execute air power. No approval. Could not do that. Nope, you may not resort targets. You can only hit your targets, and that's it. So it's very frustrating of how inhibiting we were in tying our hands, even when we started doing airstrikes in Syria. Okay, but this is a high point. So this is probably my most memorable day from this deployment. So on the far left side of the screen, that's a group of TLAM strikes that were synchronized for the first strike package. I was the strike package commander, so I was in charge of the 18 aircraft that were doing kinetics. There's a mission commander above that's in charge of the air-to-air guys and a few other things. But I was a strike package commander. I was in the first package, which is a night US-only package. And that's the center of the screen mostly. Some of it's to the east. And then mostly to the east, what you can see there, those are all of the kinetics from the second package that was like 45 minutes or so after us. And that was a Navy-led package with a bunch of coalition players. It was heavily weighted to the coalition. So as we sit around, we'd gotten some wind that this was gonna happen. This was about 2 weeks before. And we start looking at it, and we have some VTCs with people in the KAOC, and we're going around looking at it. And so they start, this is just like red flag. This is, I know this, right? You ever heard, it was like, this is why I want the red flag. And like, absolutely not. Like, no. Time out. So I put this up there to show you, like, just put a lens on this, like, just to frame it. Those are to scale, okay? So the blue is where red flag good guys start, and the red is where bad guys at red flag start. That's it. That's how big the war is, right? And the targets are usually on the west side of the range. So you're talking about double the range just to start this problem, okay? Double the range. And then you go, well, at red flag, I can just go back and land at Nellis where I took off. Like, well, my base is 2.5 hours away. I can't do that. And so my nearest base is triple the distance of what it would be if I had to go land at Nellis in training. And so now I need triple the amount of reserve fuel, which means I have a third less usable fuel to do operations. And I have to travel twice the distance. And oh, by the way, that tanker is still in Iraq because they could not go into Syria. And so that would be the equivalent of putting the tankers and our AWACS and J-STARS in Utah. Right? So this is not, air power is hard. It is really hard. When you start injecting reality into it. This isn't even someone that's shooting back at us. This is just reality. So probably most famous, you guys, if there's some F-22 guys in the room, probably most famous of being the first F-22 airstrike. It was really humbling to be there in the beginning. So, like I said, we shared a building, and I told them, like, hey, I got to tell you something. Hey, there's this thing. About 10 days, like you're gonna do this, and they're like, great. What do we do? Like, okay. Remember the whole story about how weapons get on jets? So like, yeah, I don't know what that is. Like, can you teach me? Like, yes. And we had a really good working relationship. Some really great friends I made out of this deployment. But it's just that, hey, we need help. We need to make air power happen. Great. I don't have all the answers, but I can help. And so the two of us worked for a long time. Like, what are our targets? Where are we going? How are we getting there? Things that they hadn't really had to ever think about or worry about. They're there for kind of a deterrence and a presence. So their whole mental model had to switch. Here are the spins. You probably should start reading them. Things like that. They had not had exposure to that. So it was really interesting to be there, and a very good experience. I'm very proud of how those guys did. Okay, so this is my second favorite picture from this deployment. So although it says 23 September at the top of the slide, 2 days before this mission was supposed to happen, right? It got Rolexed and Rolexed again. What is going on? Like, well, they're trying to build a coalition. You do not want this to be U.S. only. And so I told you that second package had a lot of coalition players in it, right? But we had one coalition player in the U.S. package, and it was the Emiratis. And they said, we want to be part of the coalition, but we will only do it if we can fly with the Air Force. And so they Rolexed the strike package. I get a call from the Brigadier General Quinnis. He's my wing commander. He says, I'm coming over. I'm bringing a group of Emiratis. I'll see you in your office in 30 minutes. I'm like, oh, he's coming to my office. This must be important. So he shows up and has this group of Emirati fighter pilots with him. And the guy standing behind me in that picture is one of them. So the guy that's standing behind me, his name is Lieutenant Colonel Smash Asan. And as soon as he opened the door, I said, hey, how's it going, Smash? He goes, hey, hi, Paco. I hadn't seen that guy in probably 5 years. We did an exercise together. We spent about 4 weeks doing a multilateral training. And for some reason, I just remembered we hit it off. I never talked to him since. I remembered him. He remembered me. It was this instant bond. And it was amazing to me to see like how these dividends that we reap from all these training and host nation support and all these different multilateral exercises that we do. Like, hey, we can do this. And here's what we're going to do. And it was really easy to bring them into the fold. If you know how most countries are in the Middle East, they're a little bit apprehensive about sharing, and there's customs and culture. And it was great because we were able to just discount all of that and get right down to business to roll them into our package. So that picture was taken, I think, right before I briefed General Hesterman on the VTC. So we were just setting the conditions. He was the squadron commander for the F-16 fighter squadron. So that's my second favorite picture. So what I like to do is I want to end this on my favorite picture from the deployment. Who's seen this picture before? It was like plastered all over the news the next day, right? So this is just after the airstrikes in Syria. It was taken in Iraq, just off the tanker. It was taken by a senior airman Matthew Brutch. And he had been taken, if you work in public affairs and you do these tanker rides, you usually get in the boom pod and take some really cool pictures of aircraft getting gas. And so he walks up and he's like, hey, talks to the KC-10 pilot. And the KC-10 is on our base too. That's how I know this guy. He's like, hey, can you get him to like fly up on the left side in the pilot window? I'd love to take a picture. You're like, yeah, sure. So after we get gas, we go up there. He's like, hey, can you just like use a little bit of afterburner and take this really cool picture? It's a great picture. I love it. But that's not why I like the picture. So I kind of lied to you a little bit. I don't like the picture because I'm in it. I like the picture because I'm not in it. So this is what happened to me. I never made the push. I was the strike package commander, and I didn't make the push. I was the first jet to take off. I've briefed up to the General Hesterman. Here's the plan. We're going to go execute. I've been working on this thing like it was my baby, right? High-speed abort on the runway with an engine stall. Smoke my brakes. Tires are blown. Their tires not blown, but they're wore out. There's no spare. There's no time. There's 15 aircraft behind me. What are you going to do? Press. Just go. leave without me. And the reason I mention that, and why I really like the fact that I'm not in this picture, is that we had four jets. We had 4 ship, right? But we took 4 jets over the target that day. I just told you I wasn't there. So after I finished making this plan the night before, in that last picture, I looked really, really tired, and here's why. So when I finished all that planning, I started going through the what-ifs. Air power is really hard, right? Remember all those lessons that previous 6 weeks? There's going to be something that happens. I know it. I know we don't have a spare option. And so I went and looked at the schedule and said, well, who's flying in the wave in front of me that's in Iraq? And what weapons do they have? And so it happened to be our DO. And so I said, hey, I'm going to brief you up on a mission. I'm going to give you the products. I'm going to give you the media, everything. And so if I call you, if my wingman falls out, I'm going to call you and you're going to slide forward. And we're going to be able to take all 4 aircraft over the target and make air power happen, right? What I probably didn't account for in that conversation was the fact that what if I wasn't there, right? So that was the first part of my plan. The second part was I briefed number 3 pretty extensively in great detail. I think he was pretty angry at me at the time. Hey, if I don't make the push, this is what I need you to do. These are the considerations. Here's your backup plan. Here's your roving wingman. And so this picture is taken, this is our DO in the lead aircraft, who is that pickup game, and hey, we need your help. We need you to come join our formation. And number 4 in our formation, because number 3 is now number 1. So I love this picture because it just tells you not only is air power hard, but one of the things I always tell my guys is you never want to be that single point of failure, right? Because if it's all going to come to rest on you and you fail, we cannot afford air power to fail. And that's kind of like my dovetail back into the beginning of leadership. It's bigger than all of us individually, right? So pending any questions, so write down your questions for the end because it's going to be, I think, another hour or so. That's all I have. Thank you.